Roshi, are you there? I don't see Roshi. I do not see Roshi. Well, while we're waiting, I think she may be trying to get her computer together. Yes, Roshi may be having computer problems. Well, I will say a couple of things just that came up in the chat while we're waiting for Roshi to join, which is someone asked about Poa. I forget who that was. And thanks for all the great comments we've had in the chat and wonderful questions. And I apologize about not being able to cover everything. So one person, Besa, asked about, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, about POA practice. And actually in, so those practice of the 5 powers that I mentioned, which comes up in right, that's section 4, presentation of a lifetime's practice in summary, is actually about a kind of POA, but it's this special Lojong version of POA. So POA is called the transference of consciousness practice, and it is a kind of tantric, quasi-tantric, depending on how you look at it historically, certainly taught now in the context of Tantra, but possibly emerging in a sort of quasi-tantric context. But in any case, it is a specific practice about basically projecting the consciousness into the next rebirth, usually into the Pure Lands, as they are called, like the Pure Land of Amitabha Buddha, at the time of death. And that section 4 is really, and the 5 powers, really a big part of that is in fact about the that process, but not using the usual POA practice. So I think POA practice, of course, is many people do that practice, and it can be a good way of I mean, of course, if you become accomplished, they say that it really is a way from the multi-life perspective, that this is a certain way of, in a sense, dying well, if you like. But I think also POA, it can be a good, serve as a way of really engaging with death meditation on a daily basis. So Roshi is muted. I'm going to unmute Roshi.
Thank you.
And now you are co-host, I think. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to restart my computer and I lost quite a bit of, momentum.
No worries. I'll just finish and say before we move on that, one of the things that's very interesting about this particular version of the text that Tutan Jimbala put together is that Jimpa, kind of really tried to get what he felt like was an edition that is a very early version. And again, like as I said, my former student and colleague friend Jim Apple has found this work on Atisha, where Atisha really is teaching Ma Mudra, like nature of mind practice. In fact, a kind of what's called Sutra Ma Mudra, and there's a whole geeky thing we could get into about that. But in any case, it's very interesting to see how this is a text, is actually a text in the non-dual style. Especially when you look at the ultimate, the account of the ultimate. And we didn't get to go through that, but the end point of this is to say that the ultimate is korsum gnambar mitobe ishi seltong zunjuk dumaje tamagi shepa, meaning it is the primordial wisdom that's always Rangche Suyo have always been with one since beginning this time, that is free of the conceptualizations of the 3 spheres of object, subject, and action. And that is the complete integration of emptiness and luminosity, totally unconditioned. So that's ultimate bodhicitta. That perspective, which I'm confident is the way the text is talking, even though it doesn't use all those terms, is like there in the text. So it's really interesting to see. Even just I hadn't read this particular version of the text carefully, and it's really interesting to see how strongly that kind of non-dual style is present in the text. So anyway, Roshi, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, what I'd love us to do in this, the remaining minutes of our time together, is to hear from our people, our Mahasangha here. And, I'd love it, some of it to be live, going to essence, questions or insights, and also put questions or comments, in the chat stream. John and I have been holding forth enthusiastically, mostly. Thank you for the questions that you brought up. They've been really powerful and I think helpful for many of us. But this is this session is about you, and please don't hesitate.
If you want to speak live, just raise your digital hand by clicking on the reactions button and then clicking on the raise hand button there under reactions. And anyone has something to share live or in the chat?
Oh, well, this is wonderful. Heidi, as she said about Dana Paramita in Idiot Compassion. So, well,
It's a good one. Go for it, Roshi.
no, you go for it. Let
No,
me
no,
be
no.
generous. You go first. Age before beauty. You're younger than me.
This one is all for
Well,
you.
let me just say a few things about Dana Paramita that I think are really important, and then we can, deal with idiot compassion, maybe. John, you have emphasized, and Lojong emphasizes again and again, the first paramita, which is for some scholars in Zen Buddhism, is considered to be, Chinese scholars of Zen Buddhism, great Zen masters from the Tang Dynasty and so forth, the most important of all the paramitas, even more so than, you would rank wisdom at the top, of course. But actually, generosity embraces all of them. Actually, they all embrace each other. But as you said, this capacity to have a mind that is fundamentally generous, that is radically inclusive, which means that, your mind has this flavor of being completely open. And it comes back to, what Glassman Roshi emphasized in, his teachings on not knowing. Not knowing is this quality of fundamental generosity. So I like that you put idiot compassion, together with generosity. I'm kind of curious, Heidi, why you brought them together. So maybe if you want to unmute yourself for, just to let me know why you've put these in relation to each other. Heidi Evans, are you there? Okay.
We need to unmute Heidi. Is she Heidi? Let me see if I can find.
Oh, okay, great.
I'm going to unmute
John
her,
will
or is
unmute
she?
you. Yeah.
I will unmute Heidi. No, she is unmuted. Go
Okay.
ahead, Heidi, if you want to talk.
Good. Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Great.
So it's, in thinking about socially engaged Buddhist training, and specifically interacting with an individual on the street, like there's that, and I'm like looking at it, there's a lot here, but like there's polyvagal theory and trying to like have a shared experience where it's not othering the person who's living rough, and you're sort of, there's some kind of sharing that's like that might like potentially partake in the Dana Paramita, like, you would hope that there's that's kind of like no giver, no receiver, no gift, just here we are. And then, that's that phrase it's been in the back of my mind, idiot compassion, that there's some, and then I've only ever, I've only really used as an example of, well, if your kid is 28 years old and they're still living in your basement, maybe it's time for them to go out and get a job. And I haven't really seen a lot of more depth than that. So I was just wondering, is idiot compassion useful when it comes to the bodhisattva path? Like, should we even be worrying about it, or should we just be more focused on being generous?
Well, I think there's really, what you're talking about, idiot compassion, but another term that we would use for just this kind of dynamic is pathological altruism. And that's altruism that basically harms you in a fundamental way in the act of being generous, so to speak, or in an action of service. And when that happens, you can, that your altruism, so to speak, is coming from ego. And altruism that is unconditioned, just like compassion, as Francisco pointed out, is fundamentally non-volitional. It's like co-arising. And so, when you're doing it to get the bodhisattva button, or out of what is called pro-social selfish behavior, in other words, to sort of self-soothe yourself, but it actually ends up harming the other or harming yourself, then you know that the small self is involved. Generosity, there's material generosity, which is really important, but we're talking about a heart-mind quality, this kind of openness toward the world, this sort of attitude of giving, not this kind of gripping, exclusivity, specialness, and so forth.
And maybe being in practice, maybe the more you are practicing and seeing yourself and your motivations, it becomes more clear.
Well, one of the stories that I cited, a little bit ago was Atisha as a child, and the Buddha walked by, and this child offered to the Buddha a handful of dust, and the Buddha was like, "Yeah, this is like gold." And then the child grew up or was reborn as Atisha. I've forgotten which, but anyway, ended up being Atisha. So, our motivation, which is this, the motivation of a bodhisattva, which is, what John has been talking about, and I've hopefully been, referencing. If we're trying to earn merit, if we're doing good things to earn merit, that's not the motivation of a bodhisattva. Punya, it's kind of like a banking analogy, like I'm doing good and then I'm going to get a good rebirth. So it's an incentive program. But actually, when we're talking about these practices, it has to do with the sense of adaptivity, mutuality, context sensitivity, participatory sense making, as we meet the truth of suffering. And maybe it means, giving your entire bank account to that person on the street, but maybe it means bowing to that person on the street. Who knows? But we're talking about, if we use the translation, but a term often associated with this responsiveness, an appropriate response or skillful means.
I think one of the issues I have with the term, which Heidi, thanks for the great question, but I'll just say that one of the issues I guess I have a little bit with the term idiot compassion is it implies that do we have idiot wisdom too then?
Yeah, probably.
I mean, yeah. So I like it in one way, but in another way, I think it's very important for us to remember that despite the aspiration of the Beatles, love is not all you need. We can be driven, we can really want to help people, but out of our confusion, we can actually cause more harm. So it's very important for us to be wise in our compassion as well, I guess. But we probably all know that.
Well, and we know that in the Tibetan text as well, Muso Soseki in his Dialogues in a Dream, talks about three valences of compassion, but only one is, authentic compassion. And that is the non-dual or unconditional or universal compassion. So, hopefully we drop into a place that is unfiltered, unmediated, context sensitive, adaptive, this is the inactive approach that Francisco was talking about, where it's co-arising.
Oh, true. Now there
Well,
was a
good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, in the meantime, what John is saying, and this is, in all Buddhist school, the practice of dana paramita, the Theravadan school or the Mahayana or Vajrayana school, it's all the same. It is, developing this habit of opening with joy and offering. So whether we're making a water offering or offering our bank account or offering a handful of dust, it's what is the motivation?
Yes. And also it is really, as just one thing, that it just occurred to me actually, is there's an awful lot of work about reciprocity, among primates, frankly. And it said that giving is that there's a reason that this is the first paramita, even though, as you said, all the other paramitas are kind of included in it, which is that it's kind of the basis for the practice. It's like the gateway into bodhisattva practice is generosity. And one way of thinking about that actually is that to give is you give to basically one claim is that and a lot of recent research and even some older research strongly suggests that humans are spontaneously compassionate. Like the vast majority of humans, if they see another human suffering, they will respond if they perceive that human as being in their in-group.
In-group, that's the issue.
If,
but, even
but
Darwin saw that was not necessarily the case.
Yes.
When he was
Right.
attacked by the gorilla and that little spider monkey, jumped on the gorilla to, scare him off of Darwin.
Right. So right. It's not even an absolute thing, but it is definitely that we're strongly biased, but we do have that. And so taking the in-group, out-group distinction offline is a big part of what these practices are about. Again, in a way that maintains safety and so on. But when you think about giving is this thing that, it's really like you're in my in-group. It's really, I think, a gesture of connecting with another. And even quite specifically, because of the way in which reciprocity is kind of built into our evolutionary development, at least, like to give is to set up that relationship now. Like we're cooperating, we're together. So it's really, I never thought of that before, but it's actually really interesting to think about how giving kind of connects us, maybe is one of the ways of lessening that bias. There was one question that someone had, a very specific question, Elizabeth, about the text on page 97, be released through the two investigation and close analysis. And I was just looking at the Tibetan and I was looking at a Jungwon Control's commentary. And I think one of the things that this, I don't remember actually, I have received teachings on this text, but I don't remember kind of any additional oral instructions on this one. But what I would say is that based on what I'm seeing here, the basic idea of this one is that you want to it's more than just kind of noticing and then responding appropriately to the negative mental state that you're having, the one that's most obvious to you right now. There's another one another aphorism I didn't talk about, but that I should really briefly mention, which is basically, take everything as a point of meditation, meaning during the day, while you're engaged in whatever you're engaged in, really like take everything as an opportunity to practice whatever's coming up. And I'm not quite finding it yet, but if someone finds it, let me know. And in this particular context, there's a very interesting invitation to not just be aware of it and then to apply an appropriate antidote like emptiness or love and compassion, but also to try to sort of, in a sense, examine the process, maybe even afterward, like, okay, what was this trigger? Where was the self-grasping involved here? Exactly. what, preferably in the moment, but if not, then afterward, like really looking into, okay, what in a sense went awry? What's the process that led me to get caught in this negative mental state? And that inquiry into how the mind is working is part of this practice, because it also then enables you to, as it says in that passage, put on the armor, so to speak, so that the next time around you recognize it, when, let's say it's a case of some kind of a bias you have towards someone, when that, implicit bias, for example, is cropping up, you are then prepared, like, okay, I'm in this kind of situation again. I know that this is a situation and that produces this kind of a reaction in myself. Let me be very careful here. So I think that's the point of that one. But thanks for that question. That's a very interesting one that I hadn't thought a lot about. The one on page 97. Lots
Thank
of questions, Roshi. What's next?
You ask.
Let's see. I am going up. And if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask something while there's some wonderful comments. I definitely saw something, and now I've lost it. Does the Tibetan tradition train youth in these traditions? From Itisam, how do they inspire youth toward the practices? Yes, they do train youth in these practices. I would say that a lot of the training, so I've spent a lot of time at in Nepal at my main teacher's monastery, Karning Shedup Ling, also known as the White Monastery, pretty close to Bodhanath Stupa. And they have, I can't remember, several hundred monks now. I can't remember what they're up to, but many of them are actually really young monks, like pretty young kids who won't necessarily stay monks. They're really kind of as religious school, and then some will continue, and a good number will then, go on to lay lives. And many of them are, are from kind of like they're Sherpa and so on. They're culturally Tibetan, but they're from Nepali border regions. And some of them are actually Nepali, meaning like Newari or another ethnic group, not a strongly culturally Tibetan group. And in any case, it's interesting to see, like with the younger monks, like 8 years old, 7 years old, even as young as that, and because they're there to get training and, to become literate. And it's one of the few ways they can get free, good education, and also an education in their culture, is that this is taught not necessarily by reading these texts, which would be too much for children of that age, but through example. And you see, it's really fascinating to see, like one of the ways these examples are set is by even kind of the sense that they're now in robes, and they lay people kind of, in a sense, create a context in which they sort of have to act like bodhisattvas. They sort of, create an expectation in a context in which they start to behave the way they're supposed to behave, so to speak. It's very interesting how that works. Seeing for example, the young monks will sort of see elderly lay people. Like one thing that the Tibetans are very famous for is, if there's like a bug, I've seen this many times. I remember one time in Dharamsala, very old woman in the middle of the road, there's this huge beetle, and she's like got this leaf, and she's trying to scoop the beetle onto the leaf so that she can carry it to the side of the road and prevent it from getting run over. So they'll see, like the lay people will just sort of create a context in which that's just what's supposed to happen, like young monk. And then of course they pitch in immediately. So part of the way this is trained is actually, it's like a cultural approach which is why I think there are, obviously all cultures have their issues, but there are certain aspects of Tibetan culture which are really wonderful, including a kind of very strong sense of spontaneously helping anyone who's in trouble, anybody at all. And I've seen so many cases of that, and including animals. There was a young puppy that was run over outside the monastery, and people were just walking by, and it was like actually, still alive. And then there was this monk, just older monk, came over and just kind of, pet it and just gently helped it, was with it until it died after a few minutes. And it's just that kind of spontaneous compassion. It's just, wouldn't it be wonderful if our culture was more like that? Really. Anyway, I think it's wonderful to see how these, despite great challenges, these institutions in exile are managing to really continue this type of practice with young people in a way that is more than just reading texts and even sitting on a cushion. It's actually kind of living a life. Let's see what else we have here, Roshi.
John, thank you for that.
What else do we have? Feel free. Okay, Malini, please go ahead. Yes. Whoops, I
Hey,
muted you.
Malini, so good to see you.
I am trying to, yes, I am. It's a comment. Well, I'm very thankful to hear always complications of ultimate and relative bodhicitta. And I have a better, more understanding this time from John's talk. And the basic thing I would say is I was introduced to this text by Judith Leaf, and I studied this one. So,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
This is the Great Path of Awakening.
That's
when I said.
That's Jamgung Kongtrul. Yes. That's a very nice commentary.
By her. And I totally, was stuck in life training. What is it? Once I was in the retreat, solitary retreat. And actually I went through my own death to acknowledge that will happen. So that make your immediacy of practicing for your lifetime. And my real work was that because of my culture, I was in Hindu culture. So when you were talking about this culture, the religion is part of the culture. So that's why it is easier in some ways, and for others to get into go beyond the intellectual understanding. We can intellectually understand everything, but what are we practicing? That's always my question is, what am I doing? Why am I doing? What's going on? And though I was living here for over 35 years now, but that something stayed with me. So I practice that in office, or the workplaces are the best places to practice.
Yes.
And you practice them, and I'm thankful to everyone, whoever created trouble to me, because they were my teachers. They were my teachers, actual teachers. It happened. So I go back to Roshi, always reminds us, the practice, yes. Without that practice, I will not understand this at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
That goes back to my culture too. If you want to just go out, sit somewhere, kind of thing, you have to practice. So in modern culture, we reduce that time. We have too many distractions. It's easy. And I'm even thankful for last year because I retired and moved to Santa Fe, closer to Roshi here. But it gave me to drop everything and practice. I can sit, I can practice. I feel the difference now, how I see to practice anytime I want to, if anything, what irritates or whatever, happening in life, everything is possible. it's my way of looking at it, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult to people think that, oh, you're calm about this. What's going on with you? Something like that. Yes, it's the impermanence of everything. But I'm very, very thankful that, now it's the second time I'm going through the whole weekend of listening. It gives me more understanding of what coming from, because as a, grew up in a different culture. So looking at how we are looking at it here. So sometimes that was most important thing to me, how I interact with people here. I can read their body language and everything else, but what goes through, why are they asking this question, or what's going on, how? So we look at it differently. So when we are learning this text from different cultures, they come with something along with that, so
Yes.
it's a, yeah, that's why we have so many questions sometimes, because of it. And I say, that makes sense. So, well, what is it? Can look at it. It's not right. So for me to see the other people, how I relate, so that even gives a different perspective for me to understand all humans, so all people, in a better way. So I'm very grateful, and thank you
Oh,
You're
Malini.
for
most
all your
welcome.
teachings and
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you, Malini. Thank you for those comments. I wanted
You
to say
know,
one thing about that. Could I, real quick, just one response or something that brings up for me what Malini was saying is two things. One, we even know we have research now that suggests that if you can spend some time in like retreat style practice, it really has an impact. It's daily practice is extremely important, but being able to
Yes.
spend some time in a retreat, even like just a weekend, at Upaya or wherever, it really can have an impact to have that type of more intensive practice. The idea of Lojong is you can practice all the time,
All the time. Yes.
but you do need to kind of be on the cushion, at least because you kind of have to prepare yourself to be able to really do this in ordinary life, as it were. And the second thing I think that's really interesting is coming from Indian culture, Malini, is the way in which some of this is just intuitive, for example, for Tibetans, and I think even for Indian cultures that are more collectivist. And for a very individualistic culture in the United States, some of this stuff really just looks like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I'm supposed to like see myself as below that person? What? Oh yeah, really tough. Anyway, thank you very much, Malini,
Thank
for
you.
those comments.
Thank you.
well, even at the time of the Buddha said, my Dharma is swimming upstream. And I think that the venality, consumerism, the capitalism, caste, and so forth, at the time of the Buddha, the wars that were going on, I don't want to say it was better or worse, but probably there were some very fundamental similarities. And I know, since I've lived in a practice community since 1979, when I go out into the so-called real world, I'm like, no, this isn't the real world. This is really nuts. It's kind of wild, and it's sort of disturbing. And it is actually, Bernie used to talk about it, Glass Roshi used to talk about it. It is not to sequester yourself in a practice context that you lose touch with, and you're in the bubble of the monastery, that you lose touch with the suffering of the world. That is outside of the monastic context. But it's also to know that even within a practice community, and even in, Donna asked, in the case of teachers, everybody has feet of clay. Everybody. Stuff comes up for the most elevated and noble teachers. So I want to just put that a little piece in there. And Jenny, who's a good friend of mine, says, we have a lot to unlearn.
Oh, true.
And one of my students who took a few weeks off recently ended up in Costco and thought she was in a kind of insane asylum. You know? So, and this is exactly the context. Bernie would call it, this is the charnel ground.
Yeah,
This
right.
is, the monastery is to actually provide a place of incredible safety so you can drop deep into your practice. But you don't stay there. You go into the charnel ground. You expose yourself to intense suffering. And then what do you bring forward in that? And what do you learn in terms of what's evoked in you?
There's a question, speaking of, the role of
Somebody
being
said try a high school.
in try a high
No, I
school.
don't
How
think
true.
so.
Oh my God. A
I'm
question that
making
kind
a
of,
choice about my charnel grounds.
yeah, really. Well, even try a university, frankly, sometimes at least. Our students face a lot of difficulties, I have to say, especially these days. But Sandra Olney asked about, and there was another comment to this effect too, and also someone asking about Norm's book on Lojong and Zen. Could you say a few words of the merits of positive effects of adding Lojong to one's own traditions, koan-based Zen practice? I think maybe she means traditional koan-based Zen practice. So can you say more about that, Roshi? And we've already talked a little bit about it, but I think that would be a great question for us to maybe end on, like just a reflection about how is this, in your experience, integrate with Zen?
Well, I think it integrates really well, but I will say that in reading Jinpa's text, you realize that the corpus of Lojong is enormous, complex. It represents, it's articulated by different teachers, and yet. We all, Norman has favorite phrases. He didn't go through the whole corpus of Lojong by any means, nor could I with my background. But, what I find is some of these slogans are such a wake-up call. And it is, what we say in Zen, it's the taste that turns you around. When you say drive all blames into one, you're kind of like, oh, what is that? And then you have to investigate. And I think this is one of the things that is really critical in Zen practice. If we're just in choiceless awareness or shikantaza, so to speak, that's all right. But from the point of view of silent illumination, Dongshan and his teachings, there is an imperative to inquire, to be curious, to investigate, which is one of the factors of enlightenment. And I think it is not just to dully accept the arising of phenomena and let each moment be a process of liberation. But, compassion asks us to look deeply into the truth of suffering.
And I, as a kind of a Zen, a great admirer of Zen, and Zen was my first thing I encountered in Buddhism way back in 1981. Zen flesh, Zen bones, actually, oddly enough, was on the shelf of the base store at the Air Force Academy, and I don't know how that happened, but anyway,
it's Colorado,
yeah, right. I guess yes, actually, but as someone who's kind of a dabbler and has sat with you there at Upaya, I will say that some of the other elements that for me from the outside look very similar are, first of all, the perspective on the ultimate is really kind of identical. That non-dual, when you think of this in terms of being a non-dual tradition. And someone asked about that article I mentioned with Jim Apple, and I'm just going to put a Dropbox link there. So you want to click on that before we end our session if you want to download that article. And but the other thing is actually the sense in which it's like a 24/7 practice.
Yeah.
It's all the time. Every moment is an opportunity for practice out in the world. And that's also, I think, a real, just as a kind of ethos, it seems very similar. But
I tell you, it's very interesting living in as a Western person in a context of practice, because, Western people who are not so familiar with Zen, for example, and then we have to stop, but, come into a place where Zen is the tradition, where Samu, where work practice is part of the practice, where you're not just chatting mindlessly as you're sweeping the leaves is sweeping the mind. And yet, the Western work ethos is laid over, the actual practice of Samu. And, so people feel like, okay, now I have to go to work.
Yeah.
And miss the point entirely. And worse than that, miss the opportunity. But anyway,
Samu's like
John,
Samu's Lojong, right? I mean, really,
yeah,
it is
totally.
it's totally Lojong. Yeah.
So, John, it has just been so wonderful being with you these few days, and all of you, your incredible questions, and also your concerns, your experience that you've shared through the chat stream. And I thank you on behalf of our Upaya community, but you just gave so much, John. Really, boy, I'm glad you're young and energetic.
I don't feel that young, but thank you, Roshi. And
Right,
thank
well,
you so much for, asking me to join you in this way. And thank you so much to the community and the people who make this possible. We didn't see too much of Noah Kigako because he's just had a new baby. So
yeah, and they went
another
home today.
bodhisattva to join the host. And I'm just really delighted to again spend some time with you in this way and with the residents and with the broader Upaya community. And I look forward to the next time. So thank you so
Absolutely,
much.
Sean. Thank you for joining us. And Reverend Angel is doing the Dharma talk and doing an incredible weekend on the Xing Xing Ming. And we posted, Kaz and I did a translation actually of that text many years ago, and that's on the resource page. So I hope you can join or join Rohatsu. I know I'll see Malini at Rohatsu and some others of you at Rohatsu. And just, thank you for being part of the Maha community. And John, do you want to give the final blessing?
I will. I don't know any of these in English, so I hope you'll do the Bodhisattva vows also
Okay.
at the end. Evam sarvam idam krutva yamai saritam shubham tenasyam sarva sattvanam sarva dukkha prashanti kurt. Sarandi taji zipani toni nebajanam pamjane kega naje bala rupa yisi vitsola doa sho jandra sanjo rampoje make wanam keguji kyepanamba me bayan konen kodo bawa sho topadi Tubagi cancer, Jumbodan Tempani Shindu, Savadan Tensabone Shindu, Tubayin Tembayun Nebitashi so.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Roshi.
Please take care.
You too.
And John, let's just touch in. If you'll FaceTime me,
I
I'd
will.
appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for spending time with us.